WP-Get Web Dev tutorials for all user levels. Okay guys, so I'm going to do a couple of videos today, just an update of what I'm learning in Figma. Continues to impress me. There are some quirks, like everything, but the first one I'm going to talk about is how Figma handles SVGs, and it's actually really impressive. So if you look at this mock header I've got here, on the left hand side I've got these arrows, which is an SVG I've created. Now I've moved from Adobe Illustrator to Affinity Designer, so I'm going to show you what I do with a Designer. What I have found is that Illustrator certainly has a lot more control over your SVG exports than what Designer does, but we can still work with it. So what I've created here in Affinity Designer is just some diamonds with a descending size and quantity. So if we select all of that, I'm going to do a Control-Alt-Shift-S, pretty much the same as what you do in Adobe for your export. I'm going to select SVG. I've used SVG Flatten, and I've told it I only want the selected selection only, so I just want those. Now, because they're rotated, by default, Affinity will export transforms in the SVG, and I don't want that. I want very simple flattened transforms, and I want to use simple hex colors. This is because we're going to get rid of the colors. The rest of this can stay as it is. Actually, no, we don't want to rasterize anything, so I'm going to say rasterize nothing. Okay. Now, there's some reasons for this. I won't go into it here, but I did find sometimes Affinity export will rasterize things that should be vectors, and you can export text as curves if you want to here. All right, so I'm going to export this SVG, and I'm going to call this arrow 1. I've already got that there. Save that. Yes, I'm going to replace it. And if we have a look at the arrows 1 here, and I open that with Notepad++, what we'll see here is that there's a fill property. So we're setting the style. Now Adobe Acrobat, you can choose how it outputs the presentation attribute. So it's either a presentation attribute, inline styles, or classes. I don't see that as an option in Affinity Designer, but it doesn't matter because we're going to get rid of these anyway, so we've got more control of them. So in Notepad++, which I'm using, whatever your preferred is, I'm going to copy that entire style equals fill, whatever, and I'm just going to Control-A to select all, Control-F for find, and we want to do a replace, and we're going to paste the style equals fill, what have we got, hash EB, and we're going to replace it with nothing, and just a normal search and replace. So if I hit replace all, and then close this, all of my fills have gone. Okay, the reason we want to do that is that in when we use this SVG in a page builder or HTML, what we probably want to do is set the fill using a CSS rule. What we can also do by that is, for example, if this is a component here and we want that to be a different color, we can give that a class equals, I don't know, maybe it could be a logo, it could be logo top. So we might have a class of logo top, and what we'll do is we'll set the fill on that class so that it affects this path here. That could be the top of the logo. All right, so we're not going to do that here. We're just going to leave it as it is. But when we start using these in our page builder, that's why we want to get rid of those colors, so we can control that with CSS. All right, so I'm going to save that and just close. Now we've got an arrows SVG which has been simplified. If I just look at that in the browser, it just goes to black because we've got no color specified. Okay, so in Figma, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here, just give myself some space, or just a temporary frame, sorry they call it. And on that frame, I'm just going to go File, Place Image, and I'm going to select my arrows 1 that I just created, okay? and I'm going to place that on the screen. Now the strange thing I found, I don't know whether this is because the SVGs are coming from Affinity, but actually let's just go back to that, because I know there's a size and a view box there. So if I open that with Notepad, I've got, what have I got here? I've got a view box. That may be why. So when I export from Affinity, I don't get a width and a height, I just get the view box. Actually I do get a height, with the height, they put it at 100%. So if I actually set that to be, I'm going to try this actually. So anyway, sorry, going back a step. So the SVG that I just inserted only has a, whoops, why can't I see that? Yeah, it has a width and a height of 1. Change that to 100 and 100, and now I can see it and I can scale it however I want to. Okay, so it's not importing properly. I'm actually going to try that now. I'm going to set the height to width of 373 or 393 and a height of 788. So I'll set that property in the actual SVG and see what happens when I put that into Figma now. Place an image, select our arrow, open. There we go. So when I export from Affinity Designer, I'm getting width and height of 100%. And Figma's not recognizing that, it's just recognizing it as a 1 pixel image. So either way, it doesn't really matter. I would say it probably makes sense to set your width and the height to the same as what your view box is, just to prepare it properly. It would make more sense to me to do that anyway, but I'm just going to go back to Designer and see if there's an option for that. Okay, we just want the selection, we don't want to rasterize anything, downsample. Maybe I'll try relative coordinates and see what happens with that when I do that, I'm not sure yet. Export, we'll call that arrows 2. Oops. Let's have a look at arrows 2 and see what properties we've got. No. So it looks like Affinity just sets the width and height to 100% on your export. So if you're going to use this in Figma, just when you do that, you know it's going to come in as a 1 pixel by 1 pixel. You just have to change the size. Or before you when you're preparing your Figma file, sorry, your SVG, and replacing all of these style attributes with blank, or getting rid of all the style attributes, you can set your width and height to be the same as your view box, and then it will work with Figma. Alright, so that's just a little side thing. Now, let's have a look in Figma. One of the cool things about Figma, the way they handle these SVGs. So if I check out SVG, it doesn't import it as a single path, it imports it as all individual paths. So I could go to this path here, and I can change the color on that to be my accent. That could be my, sorry, the accent variation. I'll set that one to the accent, and I'll set this one here to my primary, maybe secondary. There we go. So I've just changed the color of 3 of those. I'm just going to make this a little bigger so I can see the whole thing. Alright, so there's my SVG I've imported with no colors, and within Figma I can actually control every single path and set it individually. I can even scale these. So if I decide I want that to be smaller, I'll make that smaller. So I've done that in Figma. Now what you do is, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because you've got to set your frame. I'm going to export this. I'm going to set our frame on this to be the same size as my SVG. Okay, and now what we can do is, while we're on the frame, down the bottom right here, we've got an export. We can export that as a SVG. And we're exporting frame 4, so I didn't give it a name up here. So let's say, click on the button. Okay, what do we want to call it? Frame 4, that'll do. There's our frame 4. Let's have a look at what it looks like here. Notepad. Now it does change it quite a bit. So what Figma does is it puts the path rules and the colors on every single element. So really, if you're going to use these colors as they are in your page builder or HTML document, it doesn't matter. If you want to be able to control these colors, you need to remove these fill attributes here, so you can control that with your SVG. So you control that with your CSS rules. But yeah, it's got set the height, the width and the height, the view box, and it's all ready to go. So anyway, so that is a cool thing about Figma, where you can export from Illustrator or Designer or whatever you use. When you import that into Figma, it imports every single path as a separate vector, so you can control them individually, and then you can export that entire frame as a new SVG with the colors if you want to. But the other thing you can do here is, let's say this whole frame here, we want to actually use that as a single SVG. Say for example, in the background up here, I've just got a single color. What you can do is select the entire frame and flatten it. Okay, now it's a single vector and it's got 3 colors on it. Let's just get rid of those and set the fill to our accent variation. There you go. So the whole thing is now accent variation because we've flattened all those paths down into an individual vector. So you've got the flexibility of bringing in an SVG. It could be a logo or components of a logo or a graphic like this, and then you can individually work on every single path, resize them, move them, change the color, and you can export that out if you want to then use that in your page builder. Or you can flatten the whole lot and just treat it as a single path, and just transform your colors, your sizing, everything as a single path. So that's pretty cool. I'm really liking the way Figma is dealing with SVGs. There's a lot I'm liking about Figma. Now the next video I'm going to make is about the productivity of this. This is just a scratch for some of these components. So the next video I'm going to make is about grouping all of these components here as variations, and how quick that makes it for prototyping and just mocking up wireframes ready to go. Right, so that's what I've got to say on that. So I hope you like this kind of thing and get into Figma. It's brilliant. Thank you.